With Flip Your Dog Yoga, and we are talking props in all of these tutorials. If you were with me in my previous tutorial, we were talking about different ways of holding the block in between your legs or using it to find alignment of your shins and your arms, and maybe even using it in between your legs to reinstill strength in your plank poses. Another reason why I like to use these blocks is for foundations for things like back bends and headstands and stuff. So when we utilize blocks, we're looking for them to be more of a support in whatever situation that we're doing. One of my favorite things for learning headstand is to take these blocks, wear them like Princess Leia muffins, right? So they're going to be on the floor only about shoulder width apart, just so that you can fit your head in between there. And once I get my head in between there and get my hair out of the way, I'm going to lay those shoulder heads on there. And I should have some foundation of the head into the floor. And then I'm going to bring my hands so that I can see them. So my head, my hands create an equilateral triangle, right? So my hands aren't way up here by the blocks. They're out here so I can see all of the fingertips. And then I'm going to utilize these blocks to help me engage the shoulders slightly back and my hands down, my head down, and then maybe you can float up, right? So one of the things that happens when we are doing these poses, for me personally, I'm a little taller than this block, which allows me to feel some of the weight in my head, but I feel the security of this there, so I know as a new student that I'm not going to totally crunch my neck. A lot of times I'll teach that right up against the wall. For video purposes, I did not do that here, but this will help your students really feel as though like they're not going to totally collapse on their necks at all. Another way of utilizing these blocks, if you have someone that's taller, you can get one of those little 4-inch blocks and put it in between, or start to adjust the height of your block by changing them around. The one caveat that I want to talk about is that if you're stacking blocks for any kind of inversion, listen please, you need to strap them together so that they don't fall apart until my invention comes up. Yeah, so that they don't fall apart. And then basically you just use the strap. You can actually just tie them together so that they don't fall apart. Realize that if you are using blocks for anything, especially headstands or any kind of inversion, that they can roll out. So whenever I use a block, I make sure that my weight is into the center of the block wherever it is. Even if it's something as simple as using a block to facilitate a jump through, right? Which I'll give a whole tutorial situation on that later, but I want to make sure that my hand is firmly on the block no matter whether I'm doing a jump through or if I'm using a block to do arm balances. Why? Because if my fingers are hanging off the block, then that is not going to create the openness in my hand that that I will eventually need to be on the floor, right? And so there's a difference between a hand that's gripping like this on a block and then a hand that can firmly grip the floor. Also, it allows you to get some rooting through an index finger and thumb that wouldn't naturally happen when your hand is flat. So anytime your hands are on the block, even if it's something as simple as using it in a revolving triangle, I always want that hand to be as flat as I can. As a matter of fact, I want my hands to be as flat as I can through everything. So I see a lot of people when they jump through to the top of the mat, like I just did, they'll cup their fingers. I see them doing that when they jump back as well. Don't do that. Practice with your hands flat on a block and you'll feel more success. Other ways to utilize these blocks are for engaging the core properly. And so what happens when we get tight hip flexors and tight low backs, we come into these postures, let's see, and our knees start to splay out. Like when we take our legs out and up, the knees will tend to roll out because that's easier to hold the posture. Or you can really see it when our knees are bent. A lot of times they roll out like this. So having the block in between your knees so that you're not only focusing on that inward movement, which connects more deeply to your deep transverse abs and that bowl of the pelvis, than allowing the knees to go out. Another practice for utilizing the block in abs, whenever we're doing boat, we are trying to bring the legs closer to the chest and the chest, I'm not bouncing my mic, and my chest closer to the legs. And so I can take the block and extend it out from my chest a little bit, out of my legs a little bit to my chest so that I can press my chest in and then start to straighten the legs. And this allows me to feel the squeeze of the legs. Another thing for those of you who are yoga instructors, I will be doing a whole little video tutorial on how to adjust people without ever touching them. And one of my favorite ways to do that pre-COVID was to utilize blocks. And that gives you an extra little distance. I think that as we move into the non-contact, especially if we're using masks and stuff, that we can utilize the blocks for adjustments or just some basic information. So I'll have some classes where I want people to understand that this front thigh is pushing down and this back thigh is lifting up, and that's how you're doing the posture. However, you can take this block underneath so that people have a perception and they can feel it. You can hold it, or your student can hold it, and they can try to sit down here. What that does is it gives them a feeling of a direction for students that really don't have good proprioception or body awareness in space. Also, by doing this, say taking it on the back leg and pressing into the back leg, I'm getting this nice long line of strength that otherwise wasn't there. So for you guys as instructors, maybe getting a long block and stepping away from your students to do some adjusting rather than using your hand, yet again, just using arm extenders. Okay guys, that's just a little rundown on other ways to use blocks in your yoga class.